Testing. Okay. All right. Hopefully you can hear me now. Apologize. I've gone on to having not just camera issues, it turns out, but worse camera issues than before. And now I am having microphone issues. So I've had to go to a new microphone. You're probably going to get some extra background noise, which today is probably going to mean dog barking. Really sorry about that. This Windows 11 upgrade, while overall has made me happy, has in this particular case made me very sad. So I'll see what I can do about that for next time. A couple quick updates. The website, as promised, is just about ready to go live. It's been a bit of a crazy week since we last got together, so I had not been able to get all the content up there and launch it that I wanted to yet. But I do anticipate getting that up there this weekend. So look for that soon, and there'll be a note on the Twitter feed as well when that does go live. So today we're going to chat a bit about graph use cases and sort of explore in general terms what some things are really good for graph, what things perhaps are not as good for graph. So let's just jump right into it, especially since we're just stuck staring at a blank screen at the moment. And let's look at let's look at something here. Let's look at me not being able to draw. There we go. Let's look at inventory. Oh man, that's really atrocious even for me. Let's try that again. Somehow my pen got way too small. There we go. And I wanted it. Oh, it's because I'm on the wrong pencil. Okay. Let's talk about inventory. Or inventory, and let's just really call it sort of like sales numbers. Again, sorry for the horrendous writing. And in this use case, and again, I'm going to give you some really broad stroke use cases to kind of give you concepts in sort of the simplest term, as opposed to trying to delve super deep into a use case that might not be very specific to what you're doing. So broader strokes. So let's imagine that we run some kind of a business, and we're particularly interested in understanding our sales figures, right? We want to know how much, how many transactions we're having every week, how much money is in the transactions, maybe how many transactions by types, right? So if we think about that at a real high level in terms of our business concepts, we have a transaction, right? And our transaction probably has a date associated with it. It's going to have an amount. It might have a type, a transaction type. So this might be, for example, a cash or a credit card transaction, something like that. Those are the key things that I'm probably interested in. This information will allow me to look at a particular week, a particular month, year, whatever it might be, figure out how much I'm making, and so forth. So this type of problem is what I'm going to generally describe as a basic math problem. It's a math problem, right? I'm getting a whole bunch of these things, and I might be doing some filtering based upon the date or the type, but I'm basically going to go ahead then and grab these amounts, and I'm going to do math on them. Some simple math. I'm going to add them up, for example. I might do an average on them, but it's going to be basic math. It's a basic math problem, and when we talk about sort of basic math problems, generally these are really good use cases for a relational or a columnar database. Or a columnar, right? Can you do this in graph? Sure, absolutely. But if we look at our primary domain entity here, and of course, looking at a very specific view, which was probably a larger data set. But if this is our primary use case that we're considering for graph, We've only drawn one thing. It's not relating to anything else. There's no relationships here that we care about. Now, there's probably products and customers. But again, if I'm only interested in adding up transactions, even if I care about the fact that there's maybe a product that's associated with the transaction, and maybe the product is in a particular brand or category, and I want to, filter these transactions by a particular by the ones that contain a certain brand or a certain category of product. This is still only a one relationship, one degree of separation between transaction and product, and I can do that just fine in a relational database. I can even do it in a columnar database, and when I'm grabbing lots of numbers essentially in formats that aren't changing, and just doing a bunch of math on them, like in this case, doing some summation, maybe some averages, things like that. Those databases are really, really good at handling these types of workloads very, very quickly. Again, could I do this in a graph database? Sure. But in reality, I would probably go to a relational or even a columnar database for this type of a product. Again, graph databases are something we want to look at when we have a high degree of relationships, right? I want to count out, or rather walk much further than 1 degree. That's when I'm really interested in graph. And if I don't have that for my particular use case, like here, it might not be the best use case for graph. Again, if this is a subset, potentially, of some other larger use case that is good for graph, that I can certainly solve this in graph and probably do so with a very reasonable performance sort of curve. But this alone wouldn't drive me to graph. So let's look at some other use cases that are going to be more conducive to graph. And let me see if I can just we'll just do a new page entirely. There we go. Alrighty. So let me get my pencil back. Awesome. So let's look at fraud for a moment. Fraud is something that comes up a lot in the graph space. And again, disclaimer, I am neither a graph scientist nor an expert on fraud. Okay? Yeah, but again, we're going to talk some large brushstroke pictures here. For all of these things, you can definitely go out and find links to much more technical, in-depth articles on very specific algorithms for very specific use cases and types of fraud and so on. Here we're going to, again, speak broad brushstrokes. So let's generally talk about a business where, let's say I have customers. I'm going to make that a C. And fair warning, you're probably going to hear some dog. He's gone ahead once again and buried his ball under a chair in the hopes that I will go and get it. But we're going to try to not do that right now. So we have customers, and let's say that customers open an account with me. So we'll make account A. And we'll say that customers have a phone number. Again, I'm sort of abbreviating things here so that you can kind of understand what it is I'm actually drawing here. Along the same lines, I'm probably not going to draw out detailed names on these relationships just to keep them legible. But they would certainly exist as labels. So customer has an account, customer has a phone number, they probably have a mailing address. And I will write this one out a little bit to separate it from account. And maybe they have an email as well. So generically speaking, right, this is our, and let's say accounts, let's say that of course we make transactions happen for this account, right? So whether this is a credit card account or maybe it's other type of some other type of financial instrument, but some type of transaction happens towards these accounts, right? And what I want to understand is there fraud occurring here somewhere? And of course, there are many different types of fraud. There's identity theft. There are customers who create false identities to create accounts and run up those accounts and then not and then default on them and not pay. Many different types of activities, stolen identities, stolen credit cards, things like that. So let's talk a little bit about some of those use cases and how we might be able to address them. Financial companies are really pretty good at looking at the details of the transaction. Where did it take place? When was the last transaction before this? How much is the transaction for? And determining, could this be a fraudulent transaction? This is what happens when maybe you're traveling, or you're going somewhere and you stop at the gas station, you get some gas, and then you go somewhere else and you buy a soda, and then because you're on your way to Best Buy, and then you buy a TV, and when you get to Best Buy, that transaction is denied, and you've got to call your credit card company, right? And that's because that type of pattern, as an example, can be often indicative of fraud, right? A couple small purchases really quick to test that the card works, followed by a large purchase for an item like an electronic that can be easily moved. So credit card companies, for example, are really good at spotting those. Things that are harder to spot are, require looking at a lot more data and relationships between things. So let's imagine, for example, that this represents my behavior and my account. And let's just say that there's another customer, call it C2, and they have a different address, we'll call it A2. Sorry, a different account, we'll call that A2. And they've got a different phone number. I'm going to make that P2, PH2, and with the handwriting starting to go, I apologize. And they've got a different email. I'm going to call this E2, right? So if we were to look at these things in the database, and let's say that this is myself, and this is, just some other random individual, we'd expect that they'd look kind of like this. These things do not touch each other, right? So if I were to kind of circle them, like this is a cluster of nodes, and this is another cluster of nodes. And they don't touch because my account, my address, my phone number should not be shared by this other customer. And that is normal behavior, right? That is a normal shape for this data. But what if, for example, we then see that this person adds, let me see if I can scroll this a little bit here. There we go. But what if then we see that this person adds another phone number? So they come in and say, oh, I'm not using this phone number, I'm using another phone number. Well, that's normal. I can change phone numbers and things. But what happens if maybe all of a sudden they suddenly grab and say, oh, I'm using an email address, and it's this email address? Well, that becomes interesting because now my cluster encompasses, I've chosen the wrong color. But now this cluster, right, now encompasses this as well. What do I mean by cluster? Let's back up a second. A cluster, again, is simply at its highest level, simply a term of nodes that connect to each other. Technically speaking, that's what we would call a weakly connected cluster. So a weakly connected cluster means if I start at any particular point in the graph, for example, at this customer here, and I follow its relationships in any direction, then I can, all of the nodes that I touch are part of my cluster. So if I start at this phone number, I can go backwards to this customer, and then over to this email, and to this customer, and so on. And I can hit all of these nodes. They are now all in what is called a weakly connected cluster. Conversely, a strongly connected cluster would mean I'd have to follow the relationships in the direction in which they are drawn. So, for example, I could not, this is not a strongly connected cluster because I cannot get from customer to email to customer, because the directionality in this relationship does not go from email to customer. In this case, that is not useful for us, because this clearly is something interesting to us. So we care about a weakly connected cluster. Strongly connected might be interesting in a case where, for example, we were looking at financial transactions where this may be representing a transfer of funds, and following the money, so to speak, how money gets from one source to another. That is very much directionally oriented, and so strongly connected clusters would probably be more appropriate there. But again, here, weakly connected cluster. So now we see a case where, again, these two people, they don't share an address, they don't share a phone number. When they were created, they didn't share this email address, but now suddenly they do. Well, that by itself might not be super suspicious. Maybe we've gotten into some sort of relationship. Maybe we're married now, and we're sharing a joint email account. Okay, that's possible. But what if there's now another customer in our database again? And because color is so important, I'm going to call this customer 3, and we're just going to say that they, because I'm running out of space, I'm going to say that they also have an email. And we say that this customer now suddenly attaches to this email address as well. Once again, right, expanding the size of my cluster to encompass, colors are so hard, to encompass this additional customer and account. Now we see one customer suddenly being associated with a whole bunch of other email addresses associated with other accounts. That can be very suspicious, right? This now starts to look like perhaps is this person, have they stolen identities and they've hijacked email addresses for different customers, and they're using that email address to perhaps then make changes to the account so that I can get a new credit card mailed to me, which could be seen perhaps by a change in address as well, which I did not draw here for the sake of space, or perhaps because they are actually all the same person, and they're using different email addresses to open multiple accounts under multiple false identities. But this is not normal behavior, right? And this is something that is can be very difficult to see in a non-graph-based system, because you have to be able to find these clusters of data in your database and figure out that these are suspicious. And walking these many relationships in a non-graph-based system can be very, very difficult at best. There are other scenarios certainly as well, where, let's just erase this really quickly, where same type of thing, seeing these patterns of behaviors in terms of the relationships are really either only possible or only feasible, essentially, in a graph-based system. So again, if you look at a customer and an email address base, one thing you talked about potentially is lots of different customers, so having that same email address, that can be an indicator. Another thing you might see, for example, is something like this. Let's actually do this. Yeah, we use the phone numbers. Let's make it with phone numbers, with addresses, with emails. So let's just say at some point, a customer gets 3 different phone numbers, and we'll probably put on this relationship a date as well, right? Maybe a start date and an end date if it exists. So when did I start using this phone number? When did I stop using this phone number? And what you might see is customers rotating through a set of phones, a set of addresses, a set of emails um, in a fairly regular basis. So I start off with one phone, I move to the other, I move to a third, I go back to this phone number. That again is not typical behavior, particularly again if these phone numbers might also be tied to other accounts that are exhibiting similar behavior. Seeing these patterns, these clusters, these relationships can really be indicative of, yes, this is suspicious. We need to investigate this more. And again, it can be extremely difficult to find in non-graph-based systems. So let's look at another use case really quickly. So that's a little bit about fraud. Okay, we're just touching the iceberg. So tip of the iceberg there in fraud, really talking about clustering, weakly connected clusters. I will say that, again, depending upon your database, your performance on finding weakly connected clusters and identifying them, pulling information about them can vary widely. I can, with good authority, say that I've used Neo4j's new graph data science library and done exactly that algorithm on it, and it is shockingly fast. It's a hard thing to do if you have a lot of data, finding those weakly connected clusters and identifying them, but they actually do an excellent job of making that a really, really fast process, which is something you'll need if you've got an awful lot of data to look at. So let's look at a second use case. This is a classic one, recommendations, right? This might have been sort of, this is often the first thing a lot of people hear about when they hear about graph. And this is something a lot of us have familiar with. If you've ever done any kind of online shopping on Amazon or somewhere else, and you see the, hey, customers who bought this also bought that. That's what we're talking about. So a customer has made a transaction, and that transaction is for some kind of product. So what's really happening behind the scenes there? Obviously, if without a graph database, you can do the very simple thing, which is literally just find all customers who bought a product and then look and see what other products they bought and throw those up on the screen. It's an approach. It's not a very good approach, right? Because unless this is a super specialized item, if I go out and buy whatever this thing, maybe this is, whiteboard markers. Lots of people buy whiteboard markers, and I don't want to see like everything else people have bought. The list of other things is massive, right? There's no necessarily really good way to filter that down. Instead, you need to understand characteristics. Sorry, I have to attend to the dog, or all you would have heard was dog. Have to attend to look more at different characteristics of the customer, of the transaction, of the product, right? So, I might look at all of the other customers' shopping habits in terms of not just the transaction and the product, but I may be looking at their demographics in terms of, what is the address that they're shipping things to, so I can get locality. I might be looking at demographic properties in here, such as gender or age. I'm going to look at a much broader view of product, and I'm probably going to look in terms of, what categories is it in, what brand, etc. I'm going to, potentially look at, basket analysis. So I'm really going to look at not just what did I buy ever, but what other things did people buy in the same transaction as this. So I'm going to start to look at across a lot of different relationships so that when I go in and I put this product in my shopping cart, I am going to, very quickly be able to, for all other customers who had this in their shopping cart and who look like me in some meaningful way, look at their larger aggregate baskets to understand, oh, this product too, for example, is frequently bought with this product. So this can, and obviously the algorithms for this can get extremely sophisticated in terms of analyzing the basket. But what they all have in common is you're going to be walking out a lot of relationships. And problems, we have dogs. Here. Excellent. Sorry about that. This going swimmingly from a technical perspective. All right. Sorry about the dogs. Dog's not super thrilled with the other dog walking past the house. So yeah, again, what they have in common, walking lots and lots of relationships. And while this doesn't seem like a lot of relationships, because one, it's a very simplistic model I've drawn here, and two, I'm only talking about one customer. When I think about the fact that I might have hundreds of thousands or millions of these customers who all make many transactions, I'm potentially looking at walking out millions of transactions and doing so essentially in near real time to come up with a recommendation. Those types of things just really aren't feasible unless you have a system like a graph database where you can walk out a large number of connections in an extremely short period of time. So those are recommendation engines. Again, number of companies are very, very large companies using graphs for this. It's a great area. It's one a lot of people sort of start off in. A third I want to talk about is supply chain. It's a particularly relevant topic right now in the pandemic, especially as reports are coming out that we're going to be having major supply chain issues again. Supply chain, in my view, is one of the premier areas for a graph database. And why is that? It's because supply chains, and again, I'm not an expert in supply chain, but supply chains are all about relationships, right? So eventually, if I have a store and I want to get a product to a store, right? Some point, someone is manufacturing the product, right? So I've got a manufacturer, and to build that product, they're going to ship me. They're going to have some sort of shipping, some sort of shipper, and they're going to have a. Let's actually make that a title. Let's make that a shipment. Let's make it a little bit simpler. They're going to create a shipment, and that shipment will be will contain a product, hopefully more than one product, and that will be sent to a store. Great. But before they can do that, they have to create that product, right? So they have to probably acquire component parts or materials. So they require material. They have to require component parts. Those are produced by other manufacturers. So they produce parts. They produce materials. Those, again, go to shipment. And again, I am leaving out a whole bunch of nodes here in the interest of space and time. But essentially, right? Someone's making parts, they're making materials. I need to get those as the manufacturer so that I can build those things, so I can then ship those products that I've built out to various stores. And even in this super simplistic view of supply chain, we can see there are a lot of relationships here, right? Just from this one manufacturer out to getting something to the store is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 relationships at the very minimum, really 7, 8, 9, because I need both these parts and these materials to create a single product and give it a shipment to get to the store. And of course, in reality, there are often multiple different shippers involved. There are third parties, there are warehouses, and so forth. This is a highly simplistic view. Today, most major commercial systems, and there are many for supply chain management, do this in a relational model. That leads to problems. I've talked with many people in the supply chain industry who are very much not happy with how they currently do this. They know that they have a tremendous lack of insight into the overall supply chain, and that, of course, affects their ability to deliver goods appropriately, to plan for things, right? So in supply chain, very generically speaking, there are two major issues you need to address. You need to address a demand side issue. So here's the demand side, right? This is the stores, driven by consumers typically, want some amount of goods. And then there's supply side issues, right? I, as a manufacturer or a warehouse who provides materials or parts for me to use, may or may not have the ability to produce enough things. So if I'm going to really optimize my supply chain, I want to make sure, particularly when I might have, multiple different manufacturers who can supply the same parts to me, but probably through different shipping routes because they're located in different regions of the world. They themselves have other suppliers that give them materials to let them produce the parts that they then ship to me. I need to do two things. I need to be able to anticipate demand side disruption. So let's say, for example, I put out a new product and I anticipate that I'm going to sell X number of units over a period of time, and I'm seeing that I'm selling 10x the number of units that I anticipated. Well, that's great. I'm selling a lot more things. However, I now have essentially a demand side disruption. My demand is exceeding what I've planned for. So I need to very quickly, in order to capitalize on this, I need to understand which manufacturers, which suppliers, which shippers in my supply chain can I go to, can I activate in order to get enough materials, enough parts to create enough products to meet this new demand. Because if I can't do that, I can't capitalize it, and I don't make any of the extra money of that demand it could be driving. And if I can't do that now, customers could lose interest. Conversely, as we're seeing now in COVID, depending on where these suppliers are located and what is happening there, depending upon who the shippers are, how far away they are, the shipping methods and so forth, I am having difficulty potentially getting the supplies I need from particular manufacturers. And that, of course, that's a supply side disruption. And if I can't get the materials I need, I can't meet my existing demand. So I have to be able to plan for that and be able to understand ahead of time, hey, I know, for example, let's just say that this particular manufacturer is in a region of the world with extremely high COVID rates and low vaccine rates, and that's causing labor shortages. If I know that ahead of time, and I know that this manufacturer, for example, is in a country with low COVID and high vaccination rates, and therefore not having labor shortages right now, I might want to start shifting more of my orders to manufacturer 3, even though maybe manufacturer 4 I used more in the past because I got a better price. But I know they're not going to be able to handle the demand, and I need to get my goods to market. So even though my margins might be better here, my margin on a product I can't sell is 0. So I can proactively start making these changes. But again, in order to do that, I need to understand the impact throughout the entire chain. Because, for example, if their shipping methods cause a significant slowdown where this shipping method does not, I might not make that decision. So these are really long chain impact analyses that have to happen. And it's impossible to do this at speed and scale in anything other than a graph database. There are simply too many possibilities, too many relationships to walk, and there's just not enough time to do it in order to make the decisions that are required in order to make my business. So I want to leave you with one last thought on use cases. And let's wipe this out again. And these fall into a category that I'm going to call whole graph traversals. What do I mean by that? So in some of our previous examples, we looked at a portion of the graph. So even in the supply chain, even though there's a lot of relationships involved, I'm probably looking at a handful of manufacturers to understand what is the impact or what is their role in my supply chain, and I walk those relationships. And again, that's a great example or use case for a graph. However, there are some other use cases. So if we go back sort of to a retail model, where again, customers make transactions for products maybe in a brand, transactions happen at a store, customers have an address, etc. And I might be doing a lot of great things. Basket analysis, another we alluded to earlier, a great graph use case. But if, for example, I want to understand and do an analytic where I have to look at essentially all of the data or a major portion of it in my graph. So in retail, that might be a case, for example, where for all of my customers, I want to develop an analytic that shows me what are the most frequently bought products and perhaps at what price or what discount level. So that's going to require me looking at every single customer, going to every transaction, to every product. That transaction might, again, have some sort of a promotion attached to it as well. And then walking every promotion and aggregating up all of that information to create that analytic. It's probably a very important retail analytic for me to do. I need to understand that. But it involves me essentially touching everything in my graph. This becomes a much trickier area. So graphs are really, really, really good databases when I have a discrete starting point or a couple of starting points, a couple of customers, a product, a transaction, a manufacturer, and I want to walk out lots and lots of relationships. They're really, really good at that. In this case, I want to go from like all of my customers and walk out lots of places. This is a massive thing to do. Can you do it in a graph? Absolutely. Absolutely. But you have to be careful. Caution is advised here. But that's not how you spell caution. You're going to have to start testing things at a smaller scale. Planning. How long does this, I think this analytics is going to take? What are the hardware requirements imposed upon my system in order to do this? Does my particular vendor provide some sort of enhanced analytic capability that makes this faster? So again, for example, I'm going to go back and reference Neo4j's graph data science library. That weakly connected cluster algorithm I talked about earlier, that's a whole graph problem, right? I had to look at all of the data in the graph to find those clusters. At one point, I wrote an algorithm myself that just directly did that on the database, and it worked, but it's really slow. Their graph data science library, however, has some very sophisticated and advanced techniques that take advantage of some native database capabilities that just aren't available to sort of you and I directly as an end user of that, in order to make that operation very, very fast. So depending upon your database, there may be some pre-packaged algorithms and operations that allow for these whole graph type problems to be solved very quickly, or there may not. So I would say, so check with the vendor capabilities. Also, you have to understanding your workload. Does this happen every day? Do this every week, every month? There are things like Apache's Spark X, which is their basically Spark graph extensions, hence the X, which understand how to do large-scale graph operations, and you can scale them in a potentially very large Spark cluster. So pulling a bunch of data from your graph, dumping it into a Spark X cluster, and then performing those operations on a whole bunch of machines that maybe get torn down afterwards. That can be an efficient way to do this. Certainly requires some technical sophistication, some additional infrastructure, and like everything else, understanding your particular data needs. So those are some real high-level use cases I wanted to kind of go over this week. Hopefully that was useful. Again, I sincerely apologize for the excess of technical difficulties that I had today. I'm going to see if I can't get those solved by next week, as well as get the data, rather the web page live. And in the meantime, thank you very much for joining me. I'm Clark Richey, and I'm the Graph Guy. I'll see you next week.